Business ownership has never been hotter, but how do you do it? That's where I come in. Allow me to guide you on your journey. Welcome to Ion Franchise. Sponsored by Leap Brands. From executive recruiting to hourly staff, Leap is your one-stop shop for all of your franchise talent. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another fabulous episode of Ion Franchising. I'm your host, Lance Graulich. So I love to have people that are true resources, not only franchisors and successful franchisees, but people that are a true resource to the industry. And my next guest is the founder and CEO of the Franchise Research Institute. Sounds pretty fancy. He's the founder and CEO, my friend Jeff Johnson. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Lance. Appreciate it.
Jeff, 40 years in franchising. 40. So how did you get into franchising in the first place? And where did the idea of the Franchise Research Institute come from?
It's hard to believe 4 decades in franchising, isn't it? But I was
Yes.
I was a corporate employee. I was a division sales manager for a computer supply company, and I was living in Dallas. And I'd been moved by the company a couple of times. I was 29 years old. I was tired of going to meetings. I wanted to build some family wealth, right? I wanted to own something. And so I went through the same thing everybody does. Is there a business out there that I can buy? Do I think I'm smart enough I could just invent something and start a new business? Well, I knew I wasn't smart enough to invent something. And I looked around for what was for sale. It didn't impress me. And I got caught into the franchising story. So living in Dallas, I was living in Omaha at the time. I had my very first Schlotsky sandwich, and I went to the franchisee and I talked to him.
I knew you did Schlotsky's. I love Schlotsky's.
Yeah. And so I quit my corporate job and moved my wife, 2 little kids back to hometown Lincoln, Nebraska. And I had a 3-pack, so I had rights to 3 stores, and I opened 3 locations in 4 years. I took an old step van and ripped out the inside and put a sandwich grill inside so I could be right outside the football stadium grilling hot Schlotsky sandwiches. And I took it to the state fair.
Was that approved by the franchisor, sir?
It was approved by
good.
Of course, I'm a by the book kind of guy, Lance. So yes, it was approved. And of course we paid royalties. So, I did all the silly stuff that new franchisees do. And it was a great run. Schlotsky started doing area developerships. And so I purchased rights to all of Nebraska, Iowa, North and South Dakota. And so I started helping new franchisees do what I'd already done myself. I felt like I knew. So I helped them find locations, found new franchisees, made them go through the licensing process and look for locations, helped with construction, helped them do the grand opening and did all of that. I sold my locations as I built out the area developership. And Schlotsky's went nuts. I mean, we went from 200 locations when I signed a contract to over 750. And Schlotsky's went public in December of 1995, and then they went bankrupt in 2004.
That's another story.
That's another story. We might touch on that, but we may not. Who knows where we're going to end up? But franchisees can survive bankruptcy. Area developers can't. And so my contracts are torn up, and I'm out after 17 years with Schlotsky's.
Yeah. Let's just unpack that a little bit. Okay. So because a franchisee obviously has a location, in this case, a restaurant, they get to exist.
Yes.
And area developers are the folks that have the rights to basically put people in place. But as you mentioned, your contract goes away because there's no more corporation.
No more company. It all kind of, just goes to zero. So after that 17 years, and, the reasons for Schlotsky's implosion, there are still Schlotsky's locations out there. And I'd also like to circle back. I've been surveying Schlotsky's franchisees for focus brands for years. So it kind of comes full circle, right? You come all the way back. My big takeaway, and there are several, but my big takeaway in how the Franchise Research Institute became a business was that franchisees, you have the big meetings, right? You have the convention and all the presentations, and some franchisees are asking questions or making comments, but by and large, the conversation in the hallway and in the elevator and in the bar was not the same as it was in the meeting itself. So
Yes.
there's a um, there's no safe space for franchisees to protest. And
Yeah.
so I found that franchise executives, by and large, they come out of the meeting and they've got, the chronic complainers in one ear. And there's every organization, whether it's a football team or a military unit, there's always chronic complainers, right? So you have
Yes.
those folks in one ear. And then in the other ear, you have the false praise, the teacher's pet who's going to tell you what they think you want to know. And so franchise executives came out of those big conventions and all that stuff, and they really had to just trust their gut feel. Was that a good convention or not? I mean, they just
Yeah.
so there was no way, there was no data, there's no metrics, there's no way to measure franchise performance. So I interviewed a couple professors. I hired the professor, the department chair in marketing at the University of Nebraska, and wrote the methodology because I wasn't interested in another Yelp survey or a feel good kind of thing. I wanted numbers and I wanted
Right.
data. And we wrote a methodology. And so I started doing surveys, started doing, the IFA conventions, and went on the road. And that's, Annie Ann's was an early client, and that's how we ended up doing the Focus Brands work and circled back to Schlotsky's. But my
Yeah.
message resonated with franchise executives. And so we were and we are the independent third party that provides safe space for franchisees to say anything.
Yeah.
And so we rate things, how likely are you to, knowing what you know now, how likely would you be to invest in this franchise again? So it's the famous, do it again. And if it's no, then we ask a follow-up question, why not? So we do both the quantitative and the qualitative. When we do so we've done H&R Block's franchisee surveys for 6 or 7 years. And it's not unusual to get hundreds and hundreds they've got a lot of franchisees. In one case, we had 700 responses to one question. So it's a bunch of data. And franchisors can then use the data, as a physical. So annually, we're going to go back and do a physical, and we're going to do the training, social media. So we want numbers and data for that, but then we're also going to ask a lot of questions about the relationship.
Yeah.
Do you as a franchisee feel the franchisor cares about your success and profitability? So what is a franchisor to do when half the system comes back and says, no, we don't think they care?
Yeah.
So it's a terrific tool, and for franchisors that are willing to take the data. Again, if you're not going to change anything, don't go to the doctor and get a physical. If you're just going to,
Jeff, you're giving so much great information. So you're getting hired by franchisors
yes,
to come and do this survey of the franchisees anonymously.
yes.
So now, as you mentioned, there are franchisors that you know of that get some of this bad information and don't do anything about it.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't unusual for me to be at an IFA convention and have somebody, just, poke me in the chest and say, I love what you do, but we would never do it. We just, we know too much. We don't want to give a platform to franchisees. We don't want to measure the data. We're not going to do anything any different, anyway. And those are folks that we just don't work with very often. It happens, and we've done work for franchisors that then just kind of put the stuff in their pocket. And
so do most franchisors that have glowing reviews from their franchisees that are involved with you, do they sort of publicize it and promote that, hey, look at us, you should join us because we have happy franchisees?
The first step is, are you willing to share the information with the franchisees? And so are you going to share the results with the franchisee community? And oftentimes it takes place around conventions so that the franchisor can stand up, in front and say, we asked and you answered, and here's where we're doing well, and here's areas we're concentrating on, and here's the strategic initiatives and the plans we have to shore up to make sure these stay really good, but to work on
Yeah.
these. That's the fabulous way to use it.
Yeah.
And yes, it can be part of the sales process. From where I sit, there are two main pillars to get over. You have, so when you're looking at franchise opportunities, and you talk to candidates all the time, Lance, and they want the hot deal, the new sizzling franchise, and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But again, it has to be, is there positive unit growth? What do you think of senior management? Do they know what they're doing? Is a franchise available in the city you want to be in? Those are all key steps, but it gets down to money. Can I make a return on investment? And the other pillar is, what are existing franchisees saying? And it
Yeah.
always just amazes me. You wouldn't take a vacation, you wouldn't buy a microwave without looking at what the reviews are. And yet you'll make possibly the biggest investment of your entire life, and you won't talk to franchisees. And
Yeah.
when I was living in Dallas, because Austin was the home then of where Schlotzsky's was, and I'd be out traveling with a sales rep and make the calls during the day. At night, I would always go find the local franchisee for Schlotzsky. So I was able to do my validation, calls face to
Mhm.
face. And I was able to, is it a good deal? Do you trust these people? Is it a
Yeah.
good long-term investment? Are you going to build a second location? Are you going to double down and put more money in?
So let me also explain to those listening, because we get a lot of people that are brand new to, listening about franchising on podcasts or wherever this might pop up on YouTube, of course. So the the typical step in getting engaged, if somebody comes to me, a franchise
Yeah,
consultant, franchise broker, and I introduce them to a brand, they're going to get a copy. They're going to have a first call. I call it a coffee date. Eventually, they're going to get a copy of the franchise disclosure document.
right.
And it has, for those listening, 23 items in it. The earnings claim is item 19. The investment is item 7, as an example. And all those details, great information, leadership sort of resumes or bios, and all that great stuff. But to Jeff's point, for those listening, so the most powerful part of the process is when you have an opportunity to speak to existing franchisees about their experience. Now, when you use a consultant like me, what I try to make sure all the time, and it's hard because I can't, enforce this other than because I have a lot of people that fall in lust with certain brands fairly quickly.
Amen.
And I said, well, you really need to validate. You really need to speak to existing franchisees and hear how they're doing. And there are occasions where people hear what certain franchisees say and run. And I put a big X in my system, and they're no longer on my recommended list when I hear a bunch of crap that I validate as true. And if you hear it from enough franchisees, where there's smoke, there's fire. But
Yes.
oftentimes, after my clients speak to 5 different franchisees at different stages.
Mhm.
In a lot of cases, I have people, Jeff, you're going to laugh. They go, I want to talk to the 5 worst franchisees and find out what's so bad. And I go, oh,
Mhm.
no, 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 no. That's like if you wanted to lose weight, you talk to the people that are still really overweight and ask them why they can't lose weight. That's
Yeah.
probably not a good idea. Why don't you go to the ones that finally lost the weight and ask how they did it and how much money they're making in this case? In our case, we're talking about franchising, how much money
Yeah.
they're making. And to your point, are they happy? Are they happy? And I have so many people that are happy as a result of this process and realize, hey, I asked the right questions. I even give them a list of questions to ask, which in some cases rival your survey. So what say you on all of that in that process? Because when you ask somebody, would you do it all over again? I had a guy tell me the other day, it was like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. And he goes, I would do it all over again, but there was some things I wasn't exactly prepared for, but I would still
Yes.
do it all over again.
Well, you need a representative sample. right? You don't want to talk to a half dozen franchisees that have all been in business 30 years with the franchise, or that have only been there for 6 months, or that are all in the northern half of the US or the southern, or really
Yes.
close to where the home is. I mean, you need a representative sample. Um, and I think that's item number one. I want to circle back to it ends up being such an emotional decision. And what you talk about, people, they just fall in love. And
Yeah.
so you put the business side of it on the, but I just love the cookie, or I love, whatever it is, and
Yeah.
then they forget to do their research. And how many folks do you talk to that have got an FDD that don't remember whether they got one or they've ever even looked at it? It's
All
just
the
full of
time.
legalese. And so I found that the secret sauce is on what are the what are the players saying in the locker room right now? Do they trust the coaches? Do they believe the coaches care about them? Do they have a plan, a game plan? So I like to use sports analogies, but that really sits, to me, that's where it really lands. Is the franchisor, first of all, nobody really understands what franchising is as a candidate, and they
Yeah.
don't really understand that what you really
So
have.
wait, Jeff, I have to say something to you. I've heard you and I joked about this before, and I have to bring it up right now. I
Okay.
brought up the fact that some people lust after a
Yes.
specific franchise and they're
Yeah.
falling in love. They go
Yes.
on the date with the franchisor, the coffee date, whatever. But you'll tell people that franchising is like sex.
It is, and it it is in the sense that it's not like anything else. I mean, it is
Yeah.
it's difficult. And Lance, how would you describe sex to someone that's never had sex? I mean, you actually have to be there, right?
Well,
You
we
have
don't
to
have
have.
that type of podcast at the moment, but no, the bottom
We
line is
can view
it's difficult to
it is
describe.
it is difficult to describe it. So when you're at conferences, they talk about, is it a collaboration between franchisees or franchisor? Is it a, and I'll start talking about a partnership. And then of course all the lawyers about pass out when you bring up the word partnership. The best description I ever heard, franchising, it was in an Australian franchise website, and it said franchising is a commercial marriage. And when you really think about that, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yes,
Um,
I agree.
because because you have the commercial business ROI side of it all, but then you also have, when these are folks that you're signing a 10-year contract and you're giving them a fortune, and you have all kinds of non-disclosure information and non-compete stuff. So it's not like you can just take the sign down. So
Yeah.
it is a complicated relationship. And when I talk to some candidates, I say, the IFA talks about in business for yourself, but not by yourself. Well, are you really in business for yourself? I mean, there's a long list of stuff you can't do, and and the list can change. So you're obligated to follow the operating manual, and then they change the operating manual.
Yeah.
So
But you still control the day to day and you're just following the system. It's still your employees. The biggest variable, of course, is the employees and
employees
the
are huge
customers.
customers, and so we took a bunch of data and we put it on a graph, and so we found that um, the most franchise opportunities, it's a bell curve, and so most of them are all packed in the middle at somewhere a little bit above or below average. There are some down at the bottom that you just don't want to even consider. But we started looking at that extraordinary group, that top 10%. What was unusual about those folks, and
Yeah.
what did they do that everybody else didn't do? And it was interesting because we did some work with Paul Brown when he first took over Arby's back in 2013.
Mhm.
The first thing he did was go out to see franchisees. He did a road trip.
Yeah.
And then he hired us to survey the franchisees and quantify the data. And I wish I could show you. I wanted to do a white paper on it, but they wouldn't let me. But
Yeah.
the increases in all those scores over the next 5 years that we tracked from initial training, would you recommend the franchise? There were double-digit increases over a 5-year period.
So let me ask you, I was going to ask you how you measure, because I know you can measure it all, how you
Yeah,
measure franchise or brand success. In this case, what are a couple of those things that jumped out as why he was so successful with
yeah.
Arby's?
There are two things. I mean, it's senior leadership, so the folks at the very top have to understand this. But the difference was that extraordinary group understood that they were really in two different businesses. So we're in the customer facing, customer focused, part, and you can't succeed as a business if you're not customer focused. And
Right.
the research, I mean, net promoter scores, everybody just fell in love with how would we, you know, um, the old Peter Drucker line that you can't manage what you don't measure. This is what you measure. And
Yes.
we're obsessed with the customer facing side of it. You check out of the hotel and you get in your Uber, and Marriott wants to know how your stay was. And you get out at the airport and Uber wants to know how your ride was. And United has a whole step full of satisfaction stuff. And you finally get to the gate and you walk in the bathroom and they want to know how clean the bathroom is. I mean, the customer focused stuff. But the other side of it, the second business that extraordinary group knows that they're in is in the business of franchising.
Yeah.
Different skill set, different, everything is different about that. How you recruit, not customers, but how do you recruit franchisees? And so what your validation scores, and you get to a point where Arby's got in those years, they're not out selling franchises. The existing franchisees are the ones that are buying more locations and building it out and growing the brand.
Yes.
And so that top group knew that they had to focus both on the customer and on the franchisee side of it. And when you can, I mean, that's where the magic of franchising is, right, Lance? It's when you have that local Schlotsky's guy in Lincoln, Nebraska, who doesn't have a plan B. There is no, I mean, if this is, and
That's
so
it.
you're bleeding on the floor to make it successful, and then you have a franchise organization that recognizes that part of the partnership or that commercial marriage.
So yeah, the bottom line is, and I had notes on this, I don't even need to look at them anymore. It's about the relationship.
Yeah.
It's the franchisor, the franchisee, how they all relate. Are they actually listening to each other? I heard a story just the other day from a guy that I know that owns franchises, and the CEO of their group, the franchisor, is communicating to him through email. He and his partner put a fortune into their businesses, and it's not going in the right way. And he showed me the emails. They're basically being ignored. And I asked him the last time they even saw a representative from the franchisor. And he goes, months. He goes, nobody seems to care. And you know what I learned? And you know this even better than me. Support and marketing are the two most common gripes, complaints, realities. Like, I don't feel supported, or what the heck did they do with my marketing money? But either way, to your point, shows up in the surveys that you do, right?
Absolutely, comes out loud and clear. They're using the marketing dollars, advertising in places that we don't have any stores, but they're just trying to find new franchisees. So they're using marketing funds. In some cases, I suppose it's legal, but yes. How are the funds being used? Franchise business consultants always get a huge hit. And the franchisee that's been out there for any number of years, you hire these young folks, you call them franchise business consultants, you send them out here and you expect me to train them for you. What's in it for me? And so that's, you talked about that kind of a support, and that's always a huge trigger.
So with all of your experience, people listening that are looking for a great business and potentially a franchise, how do they know? Is it, number one, work with a franchise consultant? But how do they know the difference between a good franchise or even a crap franchise versus a great one?
Yeah.
Is it, are the signs that the leadership in the first place maybe isn't so good from the first call to the second call, and you're not sure, and you go through validation anyway, and then you run like crazy? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, you can't run like crazy. That's one of the challenges. So you
Run
have
away,
to
I
do,
should say.
yeah. So you have to do your due diligence, and you know, if there's 4,000 franchises out there, how many do you suppose would really qualify as extraordinary? And of
And
those,
what
how
is
many
that
would?
answer in your opinion from what you know today? Take a guess.
I wish it was 10%. I
Okay.
don't think it is.
Yeah.
I think that extraordinary group, it's complicated. Folks that get into franchising because they want to make a lot of money in royalties. So on the franchisor side, if their style is very autocratic and they want to tell people what to do, and just that, they are not candidates to be franchisors. They shouldn't, because I was at a conference in DC a year or two ago, and the woman that sat next to us said, "Is it even possible to have a happy franchisee?" So if
Wow.
you have to care, you know, it 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 requires. So your question was, how do you know? And we can all do a pretty good job about saying, is it customer facing? I mean, we just, is the place busy? Are people coming in? Do you like the product or the service that you're getting? I mean, so you can analyze that. It gets really tricky on the other side. Um,
Yeah.
so
But it
what is
really
the?
ends, I mean, sadly, I don't know if it's sad or not, but you have to wait till the end and do validation, because validation is typically a process you're invited into.
Yeah. And so you can't. So if you're trying to do your due diligence from a validation standpoint, you're a candidate. Um, do you just pick up the phone and start leaving messages for people? What are the odds you can get a hold of a large enough representative sample and really have an open, honest conversation? And does the franchise? I mean, I was at a conference not long ago, and the franchisor says, "I had my staff act like candidates, and they called all of our franchisees
Oh,
and kept
got
notes." And then they gave me all the results, and then I sat down with all of the franchisees that didn't give good validation. And I
wow.
asked, so I raised my hand and asked, how does that work with the relationship? I mean, his comment, and was it him? His comment was, trust but verify.
Yes.
And I was going to raise my hand again and ask a question, but that was Ronald Reagan talking about Russia. You're
Yeah.
talking about a partner, and you violated trust by secretly
Yeah.
finding out what they were going to say. Um, but if the franchisor doesn't care,
Yeah.
then there's not much you can do. And at some point, you and I have to circle back to private equity, because what is private equity doing to the whole franchise? And if we go back to the commercial marriage kind of concept, you fell in love with the founders, signed the contract,
Yes.
the business grew because of everything you did. And now you're laying in bed, and some morning you wake up and look across to your commercial marriage partner laying in bed with you, and it's somebody you never met.
Yeah.
The founder took his cash, took off. Now you're in business with somebody that you don't know if they even care about you, or they're just going to cut expenses, raise profitability, flip the franchise in 3 or 4 years. So private equity is a issue too, and I don't know how we're ever going to deal with that, Lance, because it's just
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
But from a franchisee is a minority partner. It's not, and so you own less than 1% of whatever the heck it is, and if you can't trust the majority partner to make decisions that benefit all of the stakeholders, now you have a problem. So
Yeah.
it's possible to do all your due diligence on the front end and still end up with a dicey situation on the back end. And it
Yeah, but in
unfortunately it's
most
happened.
cases, while I know you love the franchise space, and some
I
of
do.
this might sound doom and gloom, if you pick the right franchise in the first place, based on doing all the appropriate due diligence, work with a consultant like me, for example, to make sure you're not wasting time talking to brands that are less than,
Yeah.
the private equity thing, it happens. It happens
Yep.
more often than not. And at the end of the day, you have a franchise agreement, you have a territory, you have
Yep.
a a mode of operations, if you will. And if you're truly not happy, like, look, when Fred DeLuca passed away at Subway, there were some happy franchisees that had great relationships with Fred DeLuca. And when he passed away, I know a couple of people that immediately sold as soon as he passed. You might
Yeah.
know as well. And that's business. And if times change, you pull your chips off the table and then you get into another franchise. I mean, look,
And that's the key, Lance, right there. This is a business decision, and go into it with your eyes wide open. There are some great opportunities out there. You and I both know that. But don't feel like, well, because it's a franchise, it's better than, or it still comes with risks. Just know exactly what the relationship's
yeah,
like, what your rights are, because stuff does change. I mean, there's
yeah,
COVID. I mean, just think of all the things that can just come out of nowhere,
yeah,
including a private equity offer. Um, but I think one of the keys you and I talked about before this was, picking the right franchise for you,
yes,
with your skill set. That's one of the things I went around when I was doing my Schlotsky's due diligence. I want to see that these franchisees, and they're successful, have some skill I just don't have. Do they know something I'm just never going to figure out? Because that's a reason for me not to do it, right?
yes,
Um,
yes. That's why
but
you always want to hear what was their first year like? What was the toughest thing to get them
yeah,
launched and ramped up
yeah,
so they were cash flowing? And sometimes the surprises are different than what people thought. And as
oftentimes,
the prospect, as you hear this live, you're like, okay, that's not so bad. I could do that. Or
yeah.
it could be the other side. No, I don't really feel comfortable doing that. That's not for me for whatever reason, right?
But get the data. Is it going to take 18 months to be profitable? If so, do you have the cash? Can
Yes.
you wait that long? So,
Yeah.
um, I am a big fan of franchising, and you know that, Lance. I just want to make sure folks know this is a business deal. Just because it's a franchise doesn't make it any better.
Yeah.
There are still, some downside risks. And back to your consultant comment, I think it's crucial to know where you can get good advice, because if you've not been in franchising, again, it's a unicorn. It's different. You need somebody to help coach you. Oftentimes, um, folks look to attorneys for business advice. I don't necessarily recommend that. They could be great attorneys, but they're not business folks, like you're talking about. And if you can find a franchise consultant, franchise broker that really gets it, yes, that can be an enormous benefit,
Yeah.
because you've got what, 900 franchises under contract,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean 900 will be good for everybody.
No.
All of So which ones, if you know me and you put the time and effort in to understand what are my goals, do I want to have something I can hand down to my kids? Do I want to build a business that's, big? What you can help me find the right touch points.
Yeah.
Um, and lead me in the right direction. But again, I would tell candidates, you really got to follow the money and find out, who's paying who when you start to take, advice from folks, and do the same due diligence in selecting a coach. You
Yeah.
want I want references from the Lance. How long has he been doing it? How much success has he had? And obviously, you've had a ton, and you're investing time in doing all of this. Um, with the podcasts, but honestly, having a good coach that put in the time and effort to understand what you're really looking for and what would be a good match it's matchmaking. I mean,
I
it's a
I
big deal.
have you'll be laughing at me right now. I have so many testimonials I've never put anywhere at this point. I'm finally going to be redoing my website and putting them on there.
Yeah,
So I'm excited to share them. And some of them are rather lengthy. They're well thought out and from the heart, because my favorite hashtag is changing lives, because that's what business ownership will do for people. Not only the money freedom and the ability to make any amount of money you truly want, but the
yeah.
time freedom, the time to do whatever the heck you want when you want to do it. I wanted to ask you,
I can coach the kids basketball teams on a Tuesday afternoon. I mean, I can set my
yeah,
own schedule. There's enormous. I believe franchising is really that great American dream, the opportunity to be in business, um, and own a piece of it. I had somebody asked me once, are you a entrepreneur or are you an operator? And I said, well, I guess I'm both.
yeah,
and it kind of depends on which stage of franchise. Are you looking at an emerging brand that is still working to figure out stuff, or are you trying to
Yeah.
buy an Arby's franchise because now you're an operator? You've partnered with somebody that has chefs looking at limited time offer recipes and all this. You don't have to do any of that. You just
Yeah.
have to have clean place, deliver the promise, to the customer. Um, Staffing, like you mentioned earlier, is a huge issue right now, and it's not going to go away anywhere soon. And everything you read about, AI and robots and all of that stuff, I don't know that there's a quick, easy solution. But the franchisor that can tap into the franchisee in all of those individual markets and fight those battles so that corporate doesn't have to, that's the secret sauce. That's the
Yeah.
magic of franchising.
No, I totally agree. It's interesting. I was a franchisee of Wingstop, and I was president of the Franchise Advisory Council, and I'd have franchisees call me all the time. We kind of divided it up geographically, the responsibilities, the council positions,
Yes.
but we had no problem. I certainly didn't, giving all the appropriate information to our franchisor corporate to say, these are the things, the certain states can't get the standard to go box to put the wings in. Instead of foam, it has to be paper in California, and all these different
Yeah.
differences that corporate might have known about, but it became unbearable for franchisees due to cost. And so it never ceases to amaze me, the things that people are truly unhappy with and have a right to be unhappy about. But how are we collectively gonna solve this?
Yeah.
And
How do you get that information up the chain so
yeah,
that the folks at the top know what's really going on down in the field? And as a member, the franchise advisory councils are great opportunities for that.
yeah. And it's interesting because one of the things that I thought was funny was we are in a capitalist society, especially in the world of franchising. Everybody's trying to make their money and stake their claim, but it becomes more of a socialist society, which normally socialism is not really a good thing. But we want to share that burden of figuring and solving these problems and collaborating as a company, because we're
Yeah.
truly in it on the same playing field, whether we have a deal for one Schlotzsky's in your example or 10. We all have a vested interest in this. Maybe it's 10 times the vested interest, but it's the exact same brand. I always say franchising is like a mastermind, except a mastermind with everybody doing the exact same thing, which is incredibly powerful. One of my biggest thoughts for you right now is
Uh-oh.
doing what you're doing. It's almost like what we've been waiting for. All the time you've been in this industry, the franchising world, for 40 plus years. So today, if somebody was going to ask you, Jeff, so you're so smart, you've been doing this 40 years. If your sister or brother were looking, or your son or daughter were looking for a franchise today, what are the best businesses for them to get into today?
There really are some great opportunities out there, but I would start with another analogy, Lance. Franchising is like shoes. So what's the best pair of shoes for me to buy? Well, men's shoes, women's shoes, hiking shoes, dress shoes. So there's all these combinations. So it gets back to, where do you want to be? What kind of it oftentimes gets back to, how much money do you have? I mean, so there's a whole list of franchises that you can't get involved in because you just physically don't have the cash to do. So you need to filter all through all of that. Money, location. I think you want a franchise that's growing, that's opening more stores that are closing. I want a senior management team that understands franchising as well as the industry that the business is in. If it's in food, you need a food person. If it's
Yeah.
oil change or whatever it is,
Yeah,
senior
food.
care.
While I love food, Jeff, food, I realized for me it worked out, but for a lot of people it doesn't, because it's the largest investment and definitely the most headaches. But look, I want to see, can you give us like a couple of names of a couple of low cost or middle of the road investments that you were shocked as a result, or maybe not even shocked, but just the results were, this is a great franchise. I wish I had a family member I want to put in this franchise tomorrow.
Yeah, and there's a roofing company in Omaha that we were doing a project for, and the franchisee, when the franchisee numbers come back, that's what. So then then we kind of try to reverse engineer, how successful was it? What's the senior leadership team? What kind of experience does everybody have? And then how much does it cost? Where are the available markets? Could I give you a handful of names? Yeah, I probably could, but I won't.
Could I
But there
guess
are,
what that one was you just mentioned?
yes,
Mighty Dog.
that sure could be the project we're working on. And they do some great stuff. Are they one of your clients?
They are. They are.
Nice.
I have a friend that's one of the early franchisees of Mighty Dog Roofing. Shout out to Chris Rahill. He has Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Nice.
Yeah, he has
Well,
4 territories.
there are, and I think that's a great example, but there are some extraordinary um, opportunities out there
Yeah.
where the leadership team really understands how can we make, the raving fans, how can we make franchisees raving fans
I
of the
love that book.
franchise? I
Great
did
book.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ken Blanchard. So you and I, grew up reading a lot of the same business books, but it
Absolutely.
is, you want for franchisor advice, you want franchisees to not be compliant.
Yeah.
If your goal is to have them just comply, you're missing the opportunity. I mean, you want franchisees that are not on the sidelines with their hands in their pockets. You want them
Yeah.
jumping up and down and running around and high five, and you want them calling their fraternity brother, you know, Peter, you got to get, you told me last time we were together, you were looking for a business opportunity. I got the one. You got to do the, so you get that flywheel effect when you have the customer status. Customers are coming back, repeat customers. And you also have franchisees going, I got to buy another territory. I want my fraternity brother to do
Yeah.
the same kind of thing.
So
That's where you're
as we wrap up, Jeff, you and I could talk for the next 3 hours. What I want to know, so people listening are like, wait a second, Jeff really didn't give us any names. How is this
correct.
any good? But what I want people to understand is there's integrity in franchising. And what you're doing is internal data for these franchisors. And what I
Yes.
want people to understand is I make sure that you get the appropriate validation. What you do with the information has to fit you.
Yeah.
And these are things that I walk people through on a daily basis. So let's jump right into takeaways. If there's a franchisor, and this is, Jeff, what I normally call on the podcast, final thoughts, final words of wisdom, we're going to divide it in two. So if there's franchisors listening, what are some takeaways? Speak to franchisors, franchise brands, if you will, and give them some advice on how to be even better.
If you're trying to achieve that extraordinary level, then you need to find an avenue to communicate open, honest feedback from franchisees. That's crucial. Just like you would, I'm having a hard time keeping employees. Well, then you need to do some employee research, some surveys, some why. And you do customer stuff all the time, but you got this huge stakeholder group, these franchisees who are invested in helping grow the business, and you don't have a way to find out what's really going on underneath the covers. And so that, I think that's crucial. Don't do it if you don't care.
Yeah.
If you're not going to lose weight, or don't go get a physical if you're not going to do anything the doctor tells you to do. Just don't do it.
Exactly.
But if you want to achieve that excellent level, you've got to, the franchisee stakeholder group is the group that has so much knowledge. They're the ones that are really forward facing customers every day, all day.
Yeah.
And like the packaging issue you had with Wingstop in California, they're the ones that are going to raise their hand saying, we got to solve this. We got to have an answer to this. And we trust the franchisor. So that would be my advice to the franchisors, to find a way to do that.
So final thoughts and words of wisdom for prospective franchisees that are looking into franchising at this point.
Well, there are some incredible opportunities in franchising. But again, there are 4,000 franchise opportunities out there in North America today. So it's overwhelming. So understand what franchising is. And so when you talk about owning the franchise, franchising is another analogy, is a lot like a hunting license. I mean, you have the opportunity for this period of time to hunt for this. So but you can't really sell your hunting license. I mean, you need to understand what the relationship really is. What are the pros and cons? I don't have to, at Schlotsky's, I didn't have to make all the mistakes I made when I started Franchise Research Institute. So a lot of those things are already taken care of, and use that to your benefit. You've got how much it's going to cost, where you have to go, what are the best, site selection metrics that you need to look at for finding that stuff's already in the can, and that's what you're paying for and you're buying. So use the same due diligence and the same, use that in every step. Don't get emotionally invested in now I want to find facts that support my emotional decision because I've already decided that I want to get that cookie franchise or whatever it is. Take a step back. And if possible, if you can find somebody like Lance that really has been in the business forever, really understands what's going on, and has a genuine interest in having lots of successful franchisees out there writing testimonials for his business.
I want referrals. All my business these days is referrals from podcasts and guest spots and friends and family and current clientele. I have one guy, besides he bought multiple franchises from me. He sends all his friends. He sends like 5 or 6 people to me a year.
That's that is the most positive referral, and that is the most positive validation you can have when you're sending friends and family to the same folks to get great quality advice, because it's a complicated process. And go into franchising with the same, don't just listen to the sizzle, get as much data and as much facts as you can.
Absolutely. Jeff, you were awesome. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk again soon. We'll probably have a part 2 to this.
That would be wonderful. Thanks, Lance.
My pleasure.
If you're ready to talk about franchise opportunities, hit the link below to schedule a call. My services are free, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening.